Fred's a talking horse. He can do whatever he wants.
I want it.
Get a grip.
Hello everyone, welcome back to My name is Tom, and this is a show where I casually talk to you about cartoons that I watched recently and want to talk about. And today we're talking about Over the Garden Wall. It's fall. It's time to be talking about this show that was a miniseries. It's more like a movie, honestly. It's like 10 episodes, 10 minutes long. It's like not long at all. If you haven't seen it already, you should probably just go and watch it before this, because I'm gonna tell some spoilers. Also, it doesn't take long to watch, so. Now, when you watch Over the Garden Wall, it feels old. Not just because of the setting, but because of the entire tone of the show that has multiple elements going into it that I'll talk about later. And it's not that it feels like it's not for kids. It feels like it's not for kids from this time period. It feels like this is a story, like a nursery rhyme, like Ring Around the Rosie or Jack and Jill or even Rockabye Baby, where the subject matter is just really dark. It's kind of morbid, it's kind of macabre, it's kind of like all these things that you think about during fall. But the thing is, like with Jack and Jill, with all these nursery rhymes where bad stuff happens, it's really easy to just kind of disconnect ourselves because it's a rhyme, it's a nursery rhyme. It's like Jack and Jill went up a hill to, I don't even know how that goes, but you know, it ends with them falling down a hill and breaking their heads open. And it's really easy to just be like, oh, that sucks, because I don't know who Jack or Jill is. But then you take these two kids and then you introduce me to them over this long period of time, and it goes from that's kind of disturbing to who let these kids out here? Like, I care about these kids, I want to protect them, but they're out here doing things in this dangerous world and there are bad things happening. So let's talk about this show. Let's talk about what it actually is before I pin in on some things and just go in on it. So the story is there's two kids, they're going through the woods of like this Narnia-like place called the Unknown, and they don't know how to get out of it. Initially, we're given zero context. You're just thrown in. You see these kids and they're trying to get home, and you don't know where home is for them. It might just be like walking a couple of minutes in any direction and they'll be home. You don't know how far away they actually are. And over the journey, they end up finding all these different places. They end up going all these different places, having all these little adventures, these pocket stories as they've been referred to, and none of them really help them get home. It's a lot of doing things and then realizing it was a waste of time. And I think that that's honestly kind of the point. Some people have criticized the fact that, oh, they went and did this and it had nothing to the story, didn't push them forward at all. But like the disturbing kind of scary aspect comes in when they've been all these places and exhausted every possibility and they don't know where to go anymore. It's easy to just keep moving forward, like, okay, we'll go here and then we'll figure it out. We'll go here and then we'll figure it out. They went everywhere and they didn't figure it out. What do they do now? And the really scary aspect is the fact they're in these woods, and in these woods there's a woodsman going around cutting down trees called Edelwood trees in order to harvest oil from them and keep a lantern going with his daughter's soul in it. But he's being instructed to do this by a beast within the forest who is turning lost souls into these trees. And the woodsman doesn't know initially, but we as the audience get this information before we get to this point where it's like we're just here in the woods and we don't know where to go. We follow these boys, Wirt and Greg, and Wirt is kind of this like insecure teenager, socially awkward, whatever. And then his little brother is Greg, and I like Greg. I know some people don't like Greg. I know a lot of people probably don't like Greg because this is the internet and characters like Greg just aren't liked. I don't understand why. Is it because y'all are cynical and seeing a little precious boy that's all happy and wants to be nice to people? Does that just like rub you the wrong way, or is it maybe because it's overused? I don't know, but I personally like him. I think Greg is important to the overall story. The world of Over the Garden Wall is accomplished through its soundtrack, through its music. Most of the time we find ourselves accompanied by this kind of folk classic 19th century style music with some blues sprinkled in here and there to capture that 19th century feel of everything that's going on. Then when it does cut to present, where Wirt and Greg are from, it's kind of more of like an 80s synth alternative pop rock type of style that tells us what time period we're in, which a lot of people have kind of speculated is around the 80s or 70s, around that era. But the thing is, this all establishes the world very well, but when we get to this this point where we don't know where we're going anymore. The music changes. It's somewhat similar to that classical feeling, but now it's more classical in the sense that it's more of a biblical type of sound. It's more what you would expect to hear in a church, and by extension, what you would expect to hear at a funeral, and it kind of sets you up to feel an end-of-life type of feeling. They also use silence a lot towards the end in the sound design, which really drives home that feeling of death. And it's really masterfully done. I don't know how to talk, I'm sorry. Y'all expected a competent host here, and I don't even know how to say masterful. And now this is where Greg comes in, because since Wirt has given up, since Wirt is at this place where he's like, I don't know how to get home, I don't know what to do, he's lost hope. Now Greg is in this situation where this is a very serious, very scary thing to be dealing with, but Greg is too young and he's not mature enough to really understand that. So he's still like this happy-go-lucky, like singing songs, doing all this stuff to just enjoy the situation as it is, and it kind of gives you hope. It kind of gives everyone a sense of hope. It kind of lightens everyone's spirits, keeps morale up, and it's really like the main thing that keeps Wirt and Beatrice, who is a bird who guides them, who used to be a person. Oh, it's a whole thing. That's her right there. Like, Greg's lightheartedness is what's keeping them in good spirits. Even though they aren't in the best spirits, it's keeping them from being in worse spirits. And then when Wirt gives up hope, Greg kind of sees what's happening and he sacrifices himself to the beast because he doesn't want Wirt to succumb to that fate, which is really dark. Even though it's such a selfless and heartwarming thing to do, Greg is basically sacrificing his life. And as much as sometimes we like to glorify sacrificing your life like it's an honorable thing to do, this is a kid. Like, you don't want to see a kid sacrifice themselves. Like, it's not their responsibility to do something like that. And it kind of becomes a tonal illustration of just how tragic it is to lose the life of a child. I mentioned how soundtrack plays such a big role in this. The song Potatoes and Molasses was just kind of Greg being a quirky little kid trying to have fun, trying to make the best of a bad situation. It's a song that if you watch the show, it's gonna get stuck in your head. Like potatoes and molasses. It's a catchy little song that's gonna get stuck in your head and it's gonna drive you crazy. But then once we get to this point where Wirt and Beatrice are trying to find Greg, and then they're in the dark and the snow, and then you hear a new version of that song play. You hear Potatoes and Molasses play, and it's in Latin, and the chords and the instrumentals are so much more somber, and there's a church choir swelling up in the background, and it gives a whole new tone to that song and a whole new tone to the situation to really drive home. This kid who's keeping everyone hopeful, who's keeping everyone's spirits up, is about to die. And this music doesn't just make it so you're watching this happen, it makes you feel like you are there. It makes you feel like you know these characters, and this child who you know is dying. And it really drives home what that means. And what the show is trying to tell us by doing this, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it really makes you realize when a kid dies, like, that's a loss of innocence, that's a loss of a lot of things. And it really makes you realize how awful it is. But I'm not exactly sure what we're supposed to take away from that. Artistically, it blows me away. So now from here, the only way presented to Wirt in order to save Greg is that the beast will put Greg's soul into the lantern, and then Wirt will have to travel across the woods and cut down edelwood trees and use its oil to keep the lantern burning. But then Wirt kind of realizes,
Wait, that's dumb.
What?
That's dumb.
there's no point in me just doing that for a soul that I don't even know is in here. In fact, it seems more like you're trying to get me to do this because your soul's in here, and then blows the lid off the beast's whole facade. And this is like a huge turning point for Wirt. And the reason why is why I'm about to talk about Wirt and everything that he goes through and how he changes in the story. I want to start first from our introduction. We meet Wirt and he seems like a bit of a dork, a little awkward, and he's basically a kid going through the process of becoming an adult and also trying to develop any emotional intelligence whatsoever. Now, I want to roast him for that, but to be brutally honest, he reminds me a lot of who I was when I was a teenager. In fact, you know what? Screw it. I don't care if that was only like 2 to 5 years ago. Teenage Tom, you were a dumbass. People want to be your friend. Stop acting like you're this outsider, because you're really not. But yeah, Wirt is in the same situation as Greg, where Greg is, like I said, not mature enough to understand what's going on, and Wirt is mature enough to understand it, but he's not mature enough to know exactly what to do about it. And he's kind of forced to step up and step out of his comfort zone, which he's not used to doing, and figure out what to do just in order to survive and get to safety. Now let's look at who Wirt is in the real world. Wirt is insecure, seems to think nobody likes him, and he's just a kid with a crush on a girl who plays clarinet and likes poetry. And he has very little self-confidence. And through this journey in the unknown, he's forced out of his comfort zone, and he's forced to do things that he normally wouldn't do, and use talents that he wouldn't normally utilize, and having them work out more often than not. And even when they don't work out, he realizes that it's not the end of the world. He kind of comes to realize how many of his fears aren't really that rational. He starts to realize that he doesn't have as much to be afraid of as he thought, and he starts to build confidence off of that. So like most teenagers, Wirt's insecurities are mostly in his head. He isolates himself and self-sabotages because he thinks that people don't like him or that he's not good enough. But when we see him in these high school social environments, we realize that people are pretty welcoming and accepting of him. And then there's the greatest moment in any piece of media. So Wirt has this crush on this girl named Sarah, and this whole time in the unknown, he's talking about how this guy named Jason Thunderburger swooped in and took her away right when he was getting the confidence to actually tell her how he feels. And Jason Thunderburger, he's built up as like this guy, like anytime he's mentioned, Wirt is like,
Sarah and Jason Thunderburger. Ugh, that guy's got his act together. He's the total package. I can't compete.
and everyone's talking about him like he's this suave, smooth guy, and guys want to be him, and girls want to be with him. And then, once we see Wirt at this party with Sarah, and he's talking to her, and she's happy to see him, in comes the man, the myth, the legend himself, Jason Thunderburger, and he's like,
Hey, Sarah. Are you ready to go?
and like, she's not even into this dude. Like, she's clearly way more into Wirt, but Wirt is so insecure that he thinks that Jason Thunderburger is just gonna swoop in and take his girl. This is because Wirt spent so much of his life being afraid to step out of his comfort zone or really do anything because of irrational fears. But then, after going through the unknown and this formative experience that builds his confidence, when the beast tries to trick him, he has an epiphany realizing that he has more control than he thinks. The beast represents fear, and through fear, he tricks and manipulates people into doing his bidding without them knowing that they're holding his life in their hands. And by realizing that, Wirt also realizes how dumb it's been for him to be afraid of all these things that he's had no reason to be afraid of. Then he wakes up in a hospital bed surrounded by these people that he now realizes have genuinely cared about him the whole time. Wirt's development comes from his experiences in the unknown, being thrust into situations where he was afraid or had to think critically and use his wit. Wirt uses the strengths that he honed throughout the story and the confidence that he built to call the beast's bluff and ultimately defeat him, exposing him as nothing more than a weak, manipulative coward. This also sets the woodsman free, and everyone gets to go home and have a happy ending. Because why not? Let's end this roller coaster on a good note. The camera died. My name is Tom, and that's all I gotta say, so it's all good. Thank you for watching Let's Talk with Tom on the Roundtable, but Tom isn't just on the Roundtable. I have my own self-titled personal channel. I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram, I have a Snapchat, I have all that good stuff. In fact, I even have a Tumblr. So, if you're interested in any of that, check that out. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.